A rival family took the farmhand's land until an owl revealed a secret in the old barn. Thomas Walker felt the ground vanish beneath his feet when the notary showed him the papers. 42 years tending that land, planting, harvesting, praying for rain, and now they were telling him none of it was his. The Blackwell family had presented old documents proving a debt owed by Thomas's father, a debt he never knew existed. The news came on a Monday morning, delivered by Mrs. Margaret Blackwell herself, matriarch of the most powerful family in Cedar Creek, a small town nestled in the heart of Tennessee. She stepped out of the black pickup truck accompanied by her son, Richard, a man in his 40s who had always looked at Thomas's land with that glint of greed in his eyes. Mrs. Blackwell wasted no time on pleasantries. "Thomas, I've come personally to inform you that this property now belongs to my family. I have here the documents proving your father's debt to my late husband. The debt was never paid, and the land was given as collateral. You have 1 week to vacate." Thomas looked at that woman with her white hair pulled into an impeccable bun, wearing expensive clothes that contrasted with the packed dirt ground of his yard. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. How could there be a debt? His father had always been an honorable, hard-working man. He never owed anything to anyone. "There must be some mistake, Mrs. Blackwell. My father would never—" "There's no mistake. The documents are all registered at the notary's office. You can go there to check if you wish. But the deadline is 1 week. Be reasonable, Thomas. No one needs to get stressed about this." Richard remained silent beside his mother, but Thomas noticed the restrained smile at the corner of the man's lips. That smile said it all. They were enjoying this. They wanted to see Thomas suffer. After the two left, Thomas went into the house and sat at the kitchen table. His hands were shaking. He was 63 years old, his health wasn't what it used to be, and now this. Where would he go? What would he do? That land was all he had. There he had raised his 3 children. There he had buried his wife 5 years ago. There his entire life was planted like the trees he himself had cultivated. That afternoon, Thomas went into town. The notary's office was on Main Street, next to the pharmacy. The notary, Walter, was a long-time acquaintance, a serious man with thick glasses and a meticulous manner. "Thomas, I'm very sorry about this situation, but the documents are legitimate. Look here, the date is 1978. Your father, God rest his soul, signed this contract with Mr. Andrew Blackwell. It was a considerable amount for the time. The property was given as collateral, and since the payment was never made. But my father never told me any of this. He always said that land was ours, earned with the sweat of our labor." "Well, my friend, sometimes people keep secrets, or maybe your father intended to pay and something happened. I can't tell you. But legally, the Blackwell family is within their rights." Thomas returned home devastated. He sat on the porch and stared at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky orange and red. 42 years. He was only 21 when he took over the property after his father fell ill. He worked from sunup to sundown, never took a vacation, never rested. And now they were telling him none of it was his. The following days were agony. Thomas began sorting through his belongings, few and simple. He didn't have much to take. Old clothes, some furniture his late wife had loved so much, yellowed photographs. Everything fit into a few cardboard boxes. It was on Thursday, 3 days after Mrs. Blackwell's visit, that something strange happened. Thomas was in the kitchen, trying to eat a piece of bread with coffee when he heard a noise at the window. It was an owl. A large owl with brown feathers and golden eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. Thomas found it curious. Owls were common in the region, but never had one landed like that, so close, so deliberately. And there was something in its beak, an old piece of paper yellowed with time. "What's this about?" murmured Thomas, rising slowly so as not to scare the creature. But the owl wasn't frightened. On the contrary, it tilted its head and dropped the paper, which fell onto the windowsill. Then, with a silent flap of its wings, it flew toward the back of the property, where the old barn that no one had used for years stood. Thomas carefully picked up the paper. It was a hand-drawn map, a map that showed his property, and on the map, marked with a faded red X, was the barn. Underneath the drawing, A single word written in shaky handwriting. Truth. Thomas's heart raced. What truth? Who had made that map? And how did the owl? It didn't make sense. But something inside him, a voice that wasn't exactly a voice, told him to go to the barn, to investigate. The barn was at the back of the property, near the border with the Blackwell family's land. It was an old structure, with dark wooden walls worn by time, and a roof of colonial tiles broken in several places. Thomas hadn't been inside for at least 2 years. There was no reason. He used a newer shed to store tools and the harvest. When he opened the creaking barn door, a cloud of dust greeted him. Sunlight streamed through the holes in the roof, creating golden beams that partially illuminated the dark interior. There were old boxes stacked, rusty tools, pieces of wood, and rotting ropes. Thomas walked slowly, observing every corner. What was he looking for? He didn't even know exactly. His eyes scanned the walls, the dirt floor, the corners full of cobwebs. Then he saw it. On one of the side walls, some planks seemed different from the others. Looser, as if they had been moved recently, or not so recently. Thomas approached and tried to pull one of the planks. It gave way easily, revealing an empty space between the outer and inner walls of the barn. Inside, covered by a thick canvas, was a metal box. Thomas carefully pulled it out. It was heavy and rusted at the edges, but still well preserved. His hands trembled as he opened the lid. Inside were papers, lots of papers, letters, documents, old photographs. Thomas picked up the first letter and began to read. It was from his father, addressed to Andrew Blackwell, dated March 1979. Andrew, as we agreed, I will start the work for the construction of the dam as soon as you deposit the second installment. With both our resources, we will have enough water to irrigate our lands all year round. It will be good for our families, for our children. I trust your word as an honorable man. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. Dam? What dam? He continued reading other letters. There was an intense exchange of correspondence between his father and Andrew. They had made an agreement. They would share the costs of building a large dam that would serve both properties. Thomas's father contributed the land and part of the money. Andrew would contribute the other part of the money and the contacts with the engineers. But at some point, something went wrong. The letters from Thomas's father began to change in tone. He demanded the second installment. He asked why the work hadn't started. He said he had fulfilled his part of the agreement. And then, in the last letter, dated November 1979, the tone was one of despair. Andrew, you gave me your word. I handed over the money I had saved for years. I put up my land as collateral because you said it was just a formality. Now you don't answer my letters, you don't answer when I come to your house. The men in town say you used the money for something else. Please don't do this to me. I have a family to support. Thomas had to sit on the dusty barn floor. Tears streamed down his face, marked by sun and time. His father had been deceived. Andrew Blackwell had used the money for other purposes and never built the promised dam. And now, decades later, his family was using that debt to take everything. But did these letters prove anything? Thomas didn't know. He needed help. He thought about finding a lawyer, but he didn't have money for that. His children lived far away, had their own lives and problems. He didn't want to bother them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Thomas put the letters back in the box and took it home. That night, he barely managed to sleep. He kept turning the papers over, trying to understand everything. There were also receipts, payment notes. His father had indeed handed over a considerable amount to Andrew, and it wasn't a loan. It was a joint investment that never materialized. The next morning, a Friday, Thomas was on the porch when a car stopped in front of his house. It was Emily, the youngest daughter of the Blackwell family, a woman of about 35 whom Thomas vaguely knew from town. She always seemed different from the other family members, less arrogant, more simple. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas. May I speak with you for a moment?" Thomas nodded yes, surprised by the visit. Emily climbed the porch steps and sat in an old rocking chair he offered. I came here in secret. My mother and my brother can't know I'm talking to you." "Of course, go ahead." Emily took a deep breath, her hands clasped in her lap. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a light blouse, nothing that reminded her of Mrs. Blackwell's elegant style. "Mr. Thomas, I've heard things. When I was a child, I heard my father and mother talking about this place, about a dam that should have been built. I never really understood, but now, after my mother decided to take your lands, some memories came back." "And what do you remember, miss?" "I remember my father saying he had a debt of conscience, that he had used money that wasn't meant to be used. My mother argued with him, told him to forget it, that it was in the past. But my father got sick, you know. Before he passed away, he talked a lot about making things right. My mother didn't want to hear it." Thomas felt a pang of hope mixed with anger. So Andrew knew he had done something wrong. His conscience tormented him. "Emily, why are you telling me this?" The young woman looked at her hands before answering. "Because I don't think what they're doing is right. I'm the youngest daughter, you know. I've always been the different one, the one who doesn't fit in. My brother Richard is mother's favorite, he'll inherit everything. Me? I work hard managing the family lands, but I never get the recognition I deserve. And now, seeing my mother do this to you, a man who's worked his whole life, I can't stay silent. But what can I do? The debt documents exist, they're recorded. There's something else. My grandmother, may God rest her soul, kept important documents in an old safe in the main house office. My mother inherited everything, but I know she never opened that safe. I have a feeling there might be something in there that could help you." "And how could I access that?" "My mother is having a birthday party tomorrow night. It will be full of people. If you can get in discreetly, I can take you to the office while everyone is distracted. It's risky, but it's the only chance." Thomas fell silent, processing the proposal. Break into the Blackwell family's house? It seemed crazy. But what if it was the only way to uncover the truth? "Why are you doing this for me? You don't really know me." Emily smiled sadly. "Because I'm tired of watching my family destroy people, because my father would have wanted things to be different, and because I recently found out I'm going to be disinherited. I overheard my mother talking with the family lawyer. She's leaving everything to Richard. She says I don't have the necessary business blood. So in a way, I'm tired of being loyal to those who aren't loyal to me." There was hurt in her voice. Thomas understood. Emily was a victim too, in her own way. "All right, I'll accept your help. Tell me what I need to do." They worked out the details. Thomas would enter through the side of the Blackwell property, where there was an old gate that led to a service road. Emily would make sure that gate was open and that no staff were around. During the party, when everyone was in the main hall, she would find a way to lead him to the office. That night, Thomas could barely sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, thinking about the plan, the letters he had found, the mysterious owl. Everything felt unreal, as if his life had turned into one of those soap operas his late wife used to watch. Saturday passed slowly. Thomas tried to keep busy, but anxiety wouldn't leave him alone. He took a shower, put on his best clothes, a pair of light cotton pants and a long-sleeved shirt. He didn't have anything very fancy, but he needed to look somewhat presentable in case someone saw him. When it grew dark, Thomas took his old pickup truck and drove to the Blackwell property. The main house was huge, an old building tastefully renovated. Lights shone in every window, and expensive cars filled the front parking area. He could hear music and voices coming from inside. Thomas circled the property until he found the side gate. It was open, as Emily had promised. He parked the truck hidden among some trees and continued on foot along the service road. His heart was pounding in his chest. He reached the back of the house and waited in the shadow of a jaboticaba tree. Minutes later, he saw Emily coming out through the kitchen door. She gave a discreet signal, and Thomas followed her inside. The house was even more impressive on the inside. Marble floors, solid wood furniture, paintings on the walls. Thomas felt out of place in that environment of wealth. Emily guided him through secondary hallways, avoiding the main hall where the party was taking place. They reached a heavy wooden door, the office. Emily turned the knob, and they quickly entered, closing the door behind them. "We don't have much time. My mother might come here to get something at any moment." The office was spacious, with shelves full of books and documents. On one side wall there was an old cast-iron safe, the kind with a wheel and everything. "My grandmother used to write down the combinations for everything in a little notebook she kept in the desk drawer. I always thought that was careless, but she was afraid of forgetting." Emily searched the drawer and found the notebook. She flipped through it quickly until she found what she was looking for. Thomas watched the door nervously. Any noise in the hallway made him jump. "Here!" Emily began turning the safe's wheel, following the written combination. With a heavy click, the safe opened. Inside were some valuables, old jewelry, and a worn leather folder. Emily took the folder and opened it on the desk. Documents. Lots of documents. They started flipping through them quickly. Contracts, deeds, receipts. And then, at the bottom of the folder, they found something different. An old photograph from 1978. In it, two men were shaking hands in front of an empty lot. One of them was Thomas's father, much younger. The other was Andrew Blackwell. Thomas turned the photo over, and his heart nearly stopped. On the back was a note. Agreement made between Joseph Walker and Andrew Blackwell for the joint construction of Cedar Creek Dam. Investment of 50% each. Original document kept with Father Anthony of Sacred Heart Parish. May God bless this endeavor that will benefit our families. March 15th, 1978. "There's a document with the priest," whispered Emily, excited. "If we can find it—" But they couldn't finish the conversation. The office door swung open abruptly, and Mrs. Blackwell entered, freezing when she saw the two there. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, shock, and then pure fury. "Emily, what do you think you're doing? And you?" She pointed at Thomas. "How dare you enter my home?" "Mother, Shut up. I knew I couldn't trust you. You've always been the black sheep, always disappointing me. And now this? Betraying your own family?" Richard appeared behind his mother, drawn by the shouting. His face twisted into a mix of anger and wicked satisfaction at the scene. "Calling security, Mother." "No need. Take that photo from his hands and throw these two out. Immediately." "Mother, please, listen to what we have to say." Emily tried, but Mrs. Blackwell cut her off. "I don't want to hear anything. You've just crossed a line there's no coming back from, Emily. Get your things and leave this house. You're no longer welcome here." "You're kicking me out?" "I'm taking from you the little you still had. I considered leaving you something in my will, but now you'll have nothing. Absolutely nothing." Emily paled, but lifted her chin with dignity. "You can keep everything, Mother, but that won't change the fact that Daddy was dishonest with your Thomas, and you know it. Get out, now." Thomas and Emily were practically shoved out of the house. When they got outside, Thomas realized he still had the photograph in his hand. At least he'd managed to save that. "I'm sorry," he said to Emily. "Because of me, you lost your home. It wasn't because of you, it was my choice. And you know what, I feel lighter now. I'm tired of living in that toxic environment." "What will you do now?" "I don't know yet. But we'll solve this together, Thomas. That note on the photo mentioned Father Anthony. We need to go to the parish." On Sunday morning, very early, Thomas and Emily went to Sacred Heart Church in downtown Cedar Creek. The parish was old, built at the beginning of the last century, with white walls and bell towers from which you could see the whole town. Father Anthony had been the pastor there for over 50 years before retiring. Now, over 80 years old, he lived in a small house at the back of the church, but his memory, they discovered, wasn't so good anymore. They were greeted by Clara, the priest's niece, who had been taking care of him for a few years. A woman in her 50s, robust and motherly in manner. "Uncle really doesn't remember much from recent years. The doctors say it's natural at his age. But can I help with something?" Thomas explained the situation and mentioned the photo. Clara looked thoughtful. "Documents stored a long time ago. Let me see. Uncle used to keep important things in the church attic. We never touched it because everything is very old and dusty, but if you want to go up and look, feel free." The parish attic was a place forgotten by time. There were stacked boxes, broken furniture, statues of saints that needed restoration. Thomas and Emily began to search, opening boxes one by one. It took hours. The heat was suffocating up there, and the dust made them cough constantly. But they didn't give up. And then, when the sun was already high in the sky, Emily let out a muffled cry. "I found it. Here. It says, Important Documents, 1970-1980. The box was sealed with old adhesive tape that came apart easily. Inside were folders organized by year. They looked for 1978 and found a thin folder labeled Agreements and Testimonies. There it was, the original document of the agreement between Joseph Walker and Andrew Blackwell. It detailed everything: the joint investment for building the dam, the cost division, the benefits both properties would have from the project. There was even a sketch of the planned dam. And more. There were receipts showing that Thomas's father had deposited his share of the money into a joint account. An account that, according to the notes, was emptied only by Andrew Blackwell weeks later. "He stole the money," murmured Thomas, feeling anger and sadness at the same time. "My father was robbed and then had his land taken because of it." "Let's take this to a judge," said Emily with determination. "This proves the original agreement was different, that your father entered into a partnership, not took out a loan." "But it wouldn't be that simple. When they looked for a lawyer in town, Dr. Fernando, he analyzed the documents carefully, but his expression wasn't very encouraging. It's complicated. Yes, these documents prove there was a different agreement than what's recorded, but there's also the debt document, which is legally registered. You would have to contest this in court, and that takes time, months, maybe years. And by then I'll have already lost my land," Thomas completed, discouraged. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. It was that afternoon, when Thomas returned home defeated, that Richard Blackwell appeared. He came alone, driving his modern pickup truck. He parked in front of the house and got out with an arrogant smile on his face. "Thomas, I heard you and my little renegade sister have been digging through old things. What do you want here?" "I came to make a proposal. My mother is very angry about this whole situation. She wants to resolve it quickly. So I had an idea. How about a challenge?" "What kind of challenge?" "Simple. You have 3 months. If you can prove that this land produces more under your care than it would under ours, it goes back to you. My mother is willing to accept this. After all, if you really deserve this land, you should be able to make it yield, right?" Thomas frowned, suspicious. "And why would you do that?" "Because my mother, despite everything, still has some sense of justice, and because, well, I'm sure you'll fail. Look at you, an old and tired man. You don't have the resources we have. You don't have the technology. You don't have the money to invest. It's a challenge you can't win. But it will give you the illusion of a chance. It's either that or immediate eviction. Choose." Thomas knew it was a trap, but he also knew he didn't have many options. Accepting the challenge would give him time. Time to think, to look for other solutions. "I accept." "Excellent, I'll arrange the papers. Oh, and just to be clear, the evaluation will be public. We'll invite independent agronomists to measure the productivity. Everything very transparent. See you in 3 months, old man." Richard left laughing. Thomas sat on the porch, his head in his hands. How was he going to compete with the Blackwells? They had money, modern equipment, access to water from artesian wells. He only had his calloused hands and knowledge gained from decades of hard work. Emily showed up the next day. She had rented a modest little room in town and gotten a temporary job at an agricultural supply store. She was determined to start her life over away from her family. "I came to help you with the challenge, Mr. Thomas. I understand management, numbers. Together we might have a chance." "Emily, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about justice. And about proving to my family that they're wrong." The two of them set to work. Thomas had a small amount of savings, enough to buy seeds and some basic supplies. They planned to plant corn, beans, and cassava, traditional crops that Thomas knew well. The first weeks were of hard work. Thomas prepared the soil, planted the seeds, tended to the seedlings with the care of someone looking after children. Emily helped where she could, quickly learning the tricks of the farm that she'd never needed to learn living in the big house. But then misfortune arrived. An unexpected drought hit the region. The sky stayed cloudless, the sun burned relentlessly, and the earth began to crack. Thomas's crops started to wilt. He watered what he could with water from the house well, but it wasn't enough. Meanwhile, on the other side of the property line, on the lands now under the control of the Blackwell family, the crops grew green and lush. They used water from deep artesian wells, which didn't dry up even in the worst droughts. Richard would appear from time to time at the property line just to laugh at Thomas's situation. "How are the little plants, old man?" "Ah, looks like they're wilting." "What a shame." Thomas would clench his fists but wouldn't respond. He wasn't going to give Richard the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. At night, alone in the kitchen, Thomas looked out the window and felt defeated. It was an unfair fight. How could he compete when they had all the resources and he had only his willpower? It was on one of these nights that the owl returned. It landed on the kitchen windowsill, exactly as it had done weeks before. Thomas looked at the creature with curiosity. "You again. What do you want now?" The owl tilted its head and then took flight, but it didn't leave. It kept flying in low circles in the backyard, as if it wanted Thomas to follow it. It was late, almost midnight, but Thomas grabbed a flashlight and went out. The owl flew in the direction of the back of the property, where the land became more rocky and uneven. It was an area Thomas rarely visited because it wasn't suitable for planting. The owl landed on a rock formation and stayed there, watching Thomas with its golden, intelligent eyes. "What's here?" murmured Thomas, coming closer. He shone the flashlight on the rocks. At first glance, nothing special. But then he noticed something. The rocks weren't arranged naturally. They seemed to have been placed there on purpose, forming a kind of semicircle. Thomas began to move the rocks one by one. They were heavy, and he needed to stop to catch his breath between each one. But he continued, driven by an intuition he couldn't explain. And then he saw it. Water. There was water springing from the ground, a hidden spring under those rocks. The water flowed in a small but steady stream, forming a trickle that disappeared among the rocks. Thomas fell to his knees, emotional. A spring. There was a spring on his property, and he never knew. Or rather, someone knew. Those rocks had been placed there on purpose to protect the spring, and he had a strong suspicion of who had done it. "Father," he whispered to the night wind, "it was you who protected this spring. You knew that one day it would be needed." In the following days, Thomas worked to divert the spring water to his crops. It wasn't a lot of water, but it was enough. He created simple channels using rocks and compacted earth. Emily helped him, the two of them working from sunup to sundown. And miraculously, the crops began to recover. The corn turned green again, the beans perked up, the cassava gained vigor. Thomas tended to each plant with renewed dedication, talking to them as if they were friends. Richard noticed the change. He appeared at the property line, observing the revitalized crops with barely contained anger. "How did you get water? Where is this water coming from?" "From my land," Thomas answered simply. "Land that my father cared for and protected." That night, Thomas woke to a strange noise. He grabbed his lantern and went to investigate. When he reached the spring area, he saw a shadow running away, and he realized with horror that someone had tried to block the spring again with stones and dirt, but they hadn't completely succeeded. Thomas worked the rest of the night to undo what had been done, protecting the spring better. And the next morning, when Emily arrived, he told her what had happened. "It was Richard, I'm sure of it. He's trying to sabotage us. We need proof." "And how will we get that?" It was Emily who had the idea. She knew her brother well. She knew how he thought. Richard wouldn't give up easily. He would try again, so she suggested they set up a watch. They would hide and wait. The following night, Thomas and Emily positioned themselves behind a cluster of trees overlooking the spring. They brought blankets because the night was cold and thermoses with hot coffee, and they waited. It was past midnight when they heard footsteps. A dark figure was approaching the spring carrying bags of dirt. It was Richard. They could see his face in the light of the crescent moon. Emily took her phone and started recording. Richard didn't notice. He was too focused on his task of blocking the spring, muttering curses under his breath as he worked. "Stubborn old man, I'll finish you. These lands are mine." They filmed for several minutes until Richard finished his sabotage and left. When he disappeared into the darkness, Thomas and Emily came out of hiding. "We did it!" Emily was triumphant. "We have the proof." The next day, they went straight to Mrs. Blackwell's house. She received them on the porch, with that expression of disdain that seemed permanent on her face. "What do you want now?" "To show you something, Mrs. Blackwell," said Emily, holding out the phone. Mrs. Blackwell watched the video and her face changed. First disbelief, then shock, and finally horror. When the video ended, she was silent for a long moment. "Richard," she called in a stern voice, "come here, now!" When Richard appeared and saw Emily and Thomas, he tried to act innocent, but his mother wouldn't let him. "I saw the video. I saw you sabotaging Mr. Thomas's property. How could you do such a thing? I raised you to be an honorable man." "Mother, Don't try to deny it. It's all recorded. You have brought dishonor to our family. I was just trying to protect our lands. That old man doesn't deserve—" "Enough. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say, Richard. You have disappointed me deeply, and more, you have made me realize something. Something I've been avoiding thinking about for years." Mrs. Blackwell sat down heavily in a chair, suddenly looking much older and more tired. "Your father, before he passed, was very ill. The doctors said it was his body, but I knew it was more than that. It was his conscience. He had no peace. He constantly spoke of correcting past mistakes, of making amends. I didn't want to listen. I said it was feverish delirium. But it wasn't, was it?" She looked at Thomas with eyes that for the first time showed something other than arrogance. They showed guilt. "My husband used that money meant for the dam. He used it to pay gambling debts he had. He was a good man in many ways, but he had this vice that shamed us. And when he realized what he had done, it was too late. Your father had given the land as collateral, believing in the agreement. And my husband didn't have the courage to admit the mistake. He preferred to continue with the charade of the debt." "Mother, you don't have to tell this." Richard tried to intervene, but she silenced him with a gesture. "Yes, I do. I've carried this burden for too long, and now, seeing you repeat your father's dishonesty in an even worse way, I can't ignore it any longer. Mr. Thomas, I ask for your forgiveness, because of what my husband did, and because I allowed it to continue." Thomas didn't know what to say. He had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was happening, he just felt tired. "What about the land?" asked Emily. "The challenge stands, but it will be fair. Richard will stay away, I guarantee that. And if Mr. Thomas proves he deserves that land through his honest work, it will be returned." The next 2 months were intense. Thomas worked like never before, tending to the crops with absolute dedication. Emily continued to help and gradually revealed herself to be an excellent learner. She had the Blackwell family knack for business, but applied it honestly and ethically. The harvest was generous, the corn grew strong, the ears full and golden, the beans were perfect, and the cassava even surprised Thomas. Huge, healthy roots that proved the quality of that soil when well cared for. When evaluation day arrived, 3 independent agronomists were called. They measured everything: yield per hectare, product quality, sustainability of the practices used. They made comparisons with the Blackwell family lands that were being managed by hired managers. The result was announced at a public meeting in the Cedar Creek Town Hall. Thomas had won. His yield was 20% higher, and the quality of the products was exceptionally better. Mrs. Blackwell was present. She stood up, and before everyone declared, "The land returns to its rightful caretaker. Thomas Walker has proven not only that he deserves that property, but that my family committed a great injustice against his. I publicly ask for forgiveness and will arrange the permanent transfer of the documents." The small audience present applauded. Thomas felt tears streaming down his face, but they were tears of relief and happiness. Emily hugged him, also crying. But the story didn't end there. Mrs. Blackwell had more to say. "There is something else you need to know. While Richard was being dishonest, I asked my lawyer to investigate the old documents more deeply, and he found something even I didn't know existed." She made a sign, and the lawyer opened an old folder. "There is a will made by my late husband Andrew in the last months of his life. He was so sick I don't even remember him doing it, but it's all legalized and registered, and in this will he leaves clear instructions." Everyone fell silent, waiting. The will states that the lands taken from the Walker family must be returned, and furthermore, that the promised dam must finally be built, with costs borne entirely by the Blackwell family as a form of reparation. And there is even a clause that deeply surprised me. Mrs. Blackwell paused, clearly emotional. "My husband writes that part of the inheritance intended for the children should also go to whoever would best care for the land in the future. He wanted this to be decided not by blood but by merit and work. It's almost as if he knew Richard would take a wrong path and that Emily would be wronged by me." Richard, who was present, turned pale. Emily, on the other hand, seemed stunned. "Does that mean—" she began. "It means that you, Emily, will receive a portion of the inheritance that I had denied you. And it means the dam will be built, finally honoring the agreement that should have been honored over 40 years ago." In the months that followed, much changed in Cedar Creek. The construction of the dam began, employing local workers and bringing development to the community. Thomas supervised part of the project, since the waters would primarily benefit his property. Emily used her portion of the inheritance to invest in sustainable agriculture. She and Thomas became business partners, combining his practical knowledge with her administrative vision. They created a cooperative that helped small producers in the region. Richard, sidelined from major decisions by Mrs. Blackwell, was sent to work on another family property in a neighboring state. They said that there, for the first time in his life, he was learning what it truly meant to work hard. And Mrs. Blackwell? She became a constant presence in the community, sponsoring social projects and trying, in her own way, to make up for the years of arrogance. Thomas forgave her, although the wounds took time to heal completely. One day, Thomas was on the porch of the house when the owl appeared once more. It perched on the railing, looked at him with those golden, intelligent eyes, tilted its head as if in farewell, and flew away. Thomas never saw it again. But he always wondered about that creature. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more, something he would never fully understand? Emily, when he mentioned it, laughed. "Mr. Thomas, not everything in life needs an explanation. Sometimes good things just happen. And sometimes when we do what's right, the universe conspires to help us." Thomas smiled. Perhaps she was right. Or perhaps the owl was his father's way of continuing to protect him, even after all this time. It didn't matter. What mattered was that justice had been done. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. But just as life seemed to finally calm down, a new situation began to unfold. The dam was almost ready, and with it many farmers in the region began to show interest in benefiting from those waters. Some in good faith, wanting to negotiate. Others, not so much. One of them was Gerald Fields, owner of a cattle ranch located further upstream on the river that would feed the dam. Gerald was a man in his 50s, burly and loud-voiced. He showed up one day at Thomas's property without warning. "Thomas, we need to talk about this dam." "Of course, Gerald. What do you need?" "It's that my ranch is upstream. If you hold back too much water here, there won't be enough up there. My cattle need to drink, my pastures need irrigation, so I came to propose a deal." Thomas invited him to sit on the porch. He served coffee, as was the custom. Gerald got straight to the point. "I want you to sell me part of the water rights to the dam. I'll pay well. What do you think?" "Gerald, the dam is being built following the original project from over 40 years ago. It was planned not to harm anyone, including your ranch. The engineers guaranteed that." Engineers. Engineers don't understand anything about reality. Listen, I'll be frank. If we don't make a deal, I might start using more water upstream. I could expand my irrigation, it's my right. I'm upstream, I get the water first. It was a veiled threat. Thomas felt anger rising but controlled himself. I'm not selling anything, Gerald. And as for using more water, that's a matter for the Farmers' Association to resolve, not the two of us here. Gerald stood up abruptly, knocking over the coffee cup. You'll regret this decision, Thomas. You'll see. In the following days, problems began to arise. The river's flow decreased drastically. The dam engineers became concerned. They went to investigate and discovered that Gerald had illegally built a temporary dam on his property, diverting a large portion of the water. The situation caused an uproar in Cedar Creek. Other farmers who depended on that river began to complain. An emergency meeting was called at the Farmers' Association. Thomas was present, as were Mrs. Blackwell, Emily, and several other people from the area. Gerald was also there, looking unfriendly. What can I do? Gerald declared when questioned. I'm just using the resources on my property. If you want water for this dam, make a deal with me. That's when Clara, Father Anthony's niece, asked to speak. She had old documents in her hands. Sorry to interrupt, but I found something important in the parish archives. They're hydrographic maps of the region made in the 1960s, when there was a similar dispute. And these maps show that the river running through Gerald's farm cannot be dammed without collective authorization. There's an old municipal law from 1962 that determines this. Gerald turned pale. What law? I've never heard of that. Well, you should have. The law is recorded and has never been repealed. It clearly states that rivers serving more than 3 properties cannot be obstructed without the consent of the majority of affected landowners, and this river serves at least 15 properties. A lawyer present confirmed the information. Gerald was forced to remove the illegal dam under penalty of heavy fines. He left the meeting furious, but defeated. The incident, however, left Thomas thoughtful. Water was a precious resource, and with the climate changes everyone had been noticing over the years, conflicts over water could become increasingly common. That's when the idea of creating a local water resource management council emerged. The idea came from Emily, who had a knack for organization and administration. The council would be formed by representatives from all properties that benefited from the river and the future dam. The proposal was presented at a new meeting of the Farmers' Association. Thomas spoke, sharing his experience and the importance of everyone working together. My friends, I've been through a lot in recent months. I almost lost everything due to conflicts and dishonesty. But I learned that when good people come together for a greater purpose, amazing things can happen. This dam isn't just mine or the Blackwell family's. It can benefit all of us, but only if we work together, with respect and honesty. The speech moved many present. The council proposal was approved unanimously. Even Gerald, still somewhat sulky, ended up agreeing. Meanwhile, the relationship between Thomas and Emily had evolved beyond business partnership. They had become true friends despite the age difference. Thomas saw in her the daughter he would have liked to have nearby, and Emily saw in him the father figure her own father couldn't quite be. One afternoon, the two of them were sitting in the shade of a mango tree, watching the dam construction in its final stages, when Emily brought up a delicate subject. Mr. Thomas, may I ask a personal question? Of course, my dear. Go ahead. Have you never thought about remarrying? Having company? I mean, it's been 5 years since you lost your wife. Thomas was silent for a moment, looking at the horizon. You know, Emily, my Catherine was the love of my life. We spent 40 years together. It's not easy to think of someone else taking her place. But it wouldn't be taking her place, it would just be having company. Someone to talk to share the days with. You're still young, you have a lot of life ahead of you. Thomas smiled sadly. Maybe you're right, but I'm not looking for that. If it happens, it happens. If not, that's fine too. I have my friends, I have you who've become like a daughter to me. I have my land back. It's more than many people have. Emily held his calloused hand. You've given me much more than you imagine, Mr. Thomas. You gave me the courage to leave a life that was suffocating me. You showed me that honesty and hard work are still worth it. You gave me a real family. The eyes of both grew misty. They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Weeks passed and the dam was completed. The inauguration was a major event in Cedar Creek. It seemed the entire town was present. There was music, food, children running and playing. Mrs. Blackwell gave a formal speech, publicly acknowledging the mistakes of the past and celebrating redemption through the dam project. She spoke about her husband, about how he would have been happy to see that dream finally realized. When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he was nervous. He was not a man of many words, especially not in front of crowds. But he had something important to say. Good people of Cedar Creek, I'm not one for fancy speeches, but I want to thank every one of you who supported me during the hard times. I want to especially thank Emily Blackwell, who had the courage to stand by what was right even when it meant losing everything. I want to thank Mrs. Blackwell, who had the humility to recognize mistakes and correct them. And I want to thank the memory of my father and Mr. Andrew, whose dream was finally realized today. He paused, emotional. This dam isn't just water. It's a symbol that it's never too late to do what's right. It's a symbol that the truth always comes out sooner or later. And it's a symbol that when we work together, we can overcome any obstacle. The applause was warm and prolonged. Thomas discreetly returned to his seat, relieved to have finished the speech. Emily squeezed his arm affectionately. The water began to fill the dam. Everyone watched, almost hypnotized, as that body of water took shape. Children threw pebbles, making ripples. Adults took pictures. It was a historic moment for that small town. But as life is never simple, new challenges would soon appear. A few weeks after the dam's inauguration, strange rumors began. They said the water was causing problems in some crops, that fish were appearing sick, that something was wrong. Thomas investigated personally. He visited the properties where the problems were reported and made his own observations. What he found was worrying. Indeed, there was something wrong with the water in some specific spots. He called the engineers responsible for the project. They ran tests and discovered the problem wasn't the dam itself, but chemical runoff from one specific property. Someone was using excessive pesticides, and the rain was carrying these products into the dam. The property in question belonged to Vincent Moore, a farmer who had an extensive soybean plantation. When confronted, Vincent was defensive. I use the products I need to protect my crop. If people are using the same water, that's their problem. But you're contaminating water that isn't just yours, argued Emily, who was accompanying Thomas to the meeting. The Management Council was created exactly to prevent this kind of problem. Council, I'm not changing how I work because of some little council. The situation was delicate. Vincent wasn't technically doing anything illegal. Pesticide use was permitted. But the quantity and the lack of care with the runoff were problems that needed to be addressed. The Water Resource Management Council met to discuss the case. It was a tense meeting with heated tempers. Some advocated for harsh actions against Vincent. Others argued he had the right to manage his property as he saw fit. It was Thomas who proposed a middle ground solution. Vincent, nobody is saying you can't use your products, but how about we do things differently? How about the council helps you implement containment barriers? It won't harm your production, but it will prevent the products from flowing into the dam. And we can even bring in an agronomist to see if there aren't more sustainable ways to control pests. It might even save money in the long run. Vincent considered the proposal with suspicion. And who's going to pay for that? The board has a fund for improvements. We can finance part of the costs. You cover the rest. It's better than having bigger problems in the future, don't you think? After much discussion, Vincent agreed. In the following months, the containment barriers were installed, and indeed the problem decreased significantly. An agronomist visited the property and suggested integrated pest control alternatives that reduced the need for chemicals by almost 40%. The case ended up serving as an example for other properties in the region. The management board gained respect and authority. Thomas, without meaning to or planning it, had become a leadership figure in the community. But he remained the same simple man as always. He woke up early, tended to his land, had coffee on the porch watching the sunrise. The difference was that now he often had company. Emily came by almost every day, bringing new ideas and contagious enthusiasm. The cooperative they had created was growing, Small producers in the region were joining, getting better prices for their products and access to more modern farming techniques. It was a gradual but real change. Mrs. Blackwell had changed too. She had become a more humane presence, less commanding. She visited social projects, talked to people she would have ignored before. Her transformation was remarkable. One day she showed up at Thomas's house with an unexpected proposal. "Thomas, I come to propose a partnership. My family has enough land for everyone. Richard is learning to be a better person away from here, but he will eventually return and need responsibilities. How about we expand the concept of the dam, create a larger sustainable development project for the whole region?" Thomas was surprised. "Mrs. Blackwell, that would be a huge undertaking. I don't know if... That's exactly why I'm asking for your partnership. You've earned everyone's respect here. People trust you. With your leadership and my family's resources, we can do something that truly changes Cedar Creek for the better." Thomas thought carefully. It was tempting, but also frightening. He was just a hand, a worker of the land. How could he lead something so big? As if reading his thoughts, Mrs. Blackwell said, "I know what you're thinking, but leadership isn't about formal education or social origin. It's about character, about making people trust you. And you have that. My husband had money and power, but he didn't have what you have. Think about it." Thomas promised to think it over. That night he talked to Emily about the proposal. "What do you think, girl?" "I think it's too big for me." "Mr. Thomas, you're already doing it. You just don't realize it. The management board, the cooperative, all of that was your initiative or influence. The difference would just be doing it more organized and with more resources. And you wouldn't be alone. You'd have me, my mother, many other good people." "But what if I fail? What if things go wrong?" "What if they go right? You always say we can't be afraid to try. Isn't that what you did when you accepted the challenge with the crops? Isn't that what you've done your whole life?" Thomas smiled. She was right, of course. "All right. Let's try then, but slowly, one step at a time." In the following months, the project began to take shape. They created a development plan that included infrastructure improvements, agricultural education programs, incentives for sustainable practices, and even rural tourism. Cedar Creek could become a model of community development. But as always happens, not everyone was happy with the changes. A group of more traditional farmers, led by a man named Benjamin Archer, began to oppose them. Benjamin was one of those who believed things should remain as they always had been. "All this talk about sustainability and cooperatives is city folks' business," Benjamin would declare at public meetings. "We've always done things our way here, and it's worked. We don't need this farmhand and this family of rich people to tell us how to work." The opposition created tensions in the community. Some agreed with Benjamin, others did not. Thomas tried to talk to him personally, but Benjamin was inflexible in his positions. "Thomas, you were one of us, a simple worker. Now you're putting on airs, making plans with the Blackwells. Have you forgotten where you came from?" "Benjamin, I haven't forgotten anything. Precisely because I know where I came from is why I want to help others in the same situation. This project isn't about changing who we are. It's about ensuring our children and grandchildren can keep working the land without going through the hardships we did." Fine words, but I don't trust it, and there are many who don't trust it either. The division in the community was painful for Thomas. He never wanted to create conflicts, only to help. But he was learning that change always meets resistance, no matter how well-intentioned it is. It was Mrs. Blackwell who suggested a solution. "How about we do a pilot project? We choose a few volunteer properties, implement the ideas there first. If it works, we show the concrete results. It's harder to argue against something that works in practice." The idea was accepted. 5 properties volunteered to participate in the pilot, including Thomas's. They implemented more efficient irrigation techniques, crop rotation, biological pest control, and they documented everything carefully. 6 months later, the results were impressive. The 5 properties had increased their productivity by an average of 30%, reduced water and chemical costs by 25%, and significantly improved soil quality. A big presentation was organized, open to everyone. Thomas and the other pilot participants showed numbers, photos, explained the processes. Even some of the skeptics began to show interest. Benjamin, however, remained resistant, until his own son, John Benjamin, a 25-year-old who had studied agronomy, asked to speak. "Father, with all due respect, these numbers don't lie. I learned in college exactly what they're doing here. It's not city stuff, it's science, and it's working. Our property is facing difficulties. The pests are getting worse, the land is tired. Maybe we should at least consider these techniques." It was a tense moment. Benjamin looked at his son, then at the data presented, then at Thomas. His pride was hurt, but he wasn't foolish. Finally, he muttered, "I'll think about it." It wasn't a full acceptance, but it was progress. And in the following weeks, Benjamin quietly began to implement some of the techniques on his property. He never admitted it publicly, but Thomas noticed the changes when he passed by his property. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you think Thomas and Emily made the right choices? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you very much for your company. Or don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.